I need here to make some welcome remarks to each and every one. Let me recognize the presence of the Minister of Youth Affairs, Culture and Sport, and the Minister of Community Development, the Chief Cultural Officer, Dr. Francis Savre, Acting Director of the 4th campus of the University of West Indies, the Open Campus, Mr. Alwin Bully, our guest speaker here tonight, and Mrs. Bully, the family of Edward Oliver Leblanc, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. What a coincidence to have such a distinguished lecture honoring a national hero one day after his birthday, Edward Oliver Leblanc, or better still, E.O. Leblanc, that's how we all knew him, first Premier of Dominica. The UE, and particularly the Open Campus Dominica site, has done it again. We have taken the lead in recognizing the immense contribution this lad from Vailcars made to his beloved country. The Open Campus, through its former head, Dr. Francis Savre, introduced to Dominica Academia a 4th distinguished lecture to its circuit. Dr. Francis Savre will expound on that feat soon. I see the usual faces who do not miss any UE Open Campus lecture, and I was about to say and more, but there are so many events taking place in a small population, the Bishop's party, the, even here, the RBC cocktail, yes? Scotiabank, sorry, Scotiabank's NBC. The Scotiabank cocktail, there is a Carilec function taking place and several others. So that has probably, in some ways, injured those who would have been prepared to come here may have gone to those functions. But you never know, as the night grows older, knowing that our guest speaker will be speaking later, they may trickle in, all of them. In welcoming you here tonight, permit me to say that I can speak of Edward Oliver Leblanc almost as family. 2 friends, Henry Augustus Wilson, my father, and E.O. Leblanc, were both born in Vailcars and worked in Portsmouth at Banana Growers Association. My father always contended that E.O.'s dream of heading the Labour Party was born at his dining table on 6 Hillsborough Street, Portsmouth. They parted as political friends over trivia. However, Ewart, Ewing, Einstein, and Ellsworth, in fact, all the E's and the Wilson siblings remained friends. All the E's attended the Dominica Grammar School, except Ewing. And Ewart and I taught at the Portsmouth Secondary School around 1975. That tells our age, but his hair is still dark, mine is different. And entering here, Ewart, I need to reveal what you said to me. That Willie's wife was the one, he said, who circumcised him. And even after so many years, he still remembers she come in, even if in a gentle way, with her scissors, and he wondered what was going to happen. But that is living testimony. He's here with us. Mrs. Leblanc, unfortunately, cannot be here because she's not feeling well. We wish her a speedy recovery. One of the dearest memories of E.O. Leblanc that remains with me is a poem he wrote, Laquelle Chimée pour point. I think it was a sonnet, 14 lines. I recall using this as a graduation theme at the Dominica Grammar School when I served as headmaster. Our educational institutions in Dominica never seem to promote our cultural heritage at their graduation ceremony. The UE Open Campus leads the Shime. Tonight, a former acting headmaster, historian, English language teacher, cultural icon, a UE graduate on whom a doctorate was bestowed by the UE last year, appropriately will deliver a distinguished lecture in conjunction with the Cultural Division. Ladies and gentlemen, join the UE Open Campus in celebrating this historical and cultural experience tonight. Thank you for being here as we savor the Gilded Mango, Culture, Livelihoods and Development in Dominica, 1950 to 2012. And we honor Edward Oliver Leblanc through this patriotic Dominican, Dr. Alwin Bully. Thank you for coming. For dry cleaning, and he will just take the next flight out. Dr. Francis Sevre to give us some special remarks. Dr. Sevre.
Thank you very much. And yes, Mr. Wilson, it does become even a little more difficult when Liat leaves your luggage in any island and you have to attend a meeting at the crack of dawn the following morning. Honorable Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports, Mrs. Justina Charles, Minister of Community Development, Honorable Gloria Shillingford. I recognize in the audience also Sir Brian Aline and Lady Brenda Aline, the Chief Cultural Officer, Mr. Raymond Lawrence, Dr. Alwin Bully, our guest tonight, Mr. Wilson, Acting Head of the UE Open Campus Country Site, Dominica, the Leblanc family, and of course, I recognize immediately Mr. Ewart Oliver Leblanc at the head table, but a special welcome, of course, to the Leblanc family. It's good to have you with us tonight. Mr. Erwin Lloyd, Minister in the Trinity Baptist Church, thank you for your invocation and your special incense to heaven. We felt it. I understand that there are students of the Open Campus Dominica here. Of course, alumni. I also, before I forget, want to recognize the person who enjoys the blessing and the grace of, well, the wife of Dr. Alwin Bully. We cannot forget you, because it is with your permission that this gentleman is here tonight, if I'm to judge from what happens to me at home. And so therefore we are in the same boat. But we are wise men and we know our limitations, and therefore for peaceful life we take orders. So thank you, Anita. And everyone, the media, we must not forget the media who will broadcast this good news for us. I hope I haven't left out anyone, but I am very pleased to see you here tonight, especially at a time when, as Mr. Wilson quite rightly said, that in a very small population, you know, when you have one or two events, you actually see the roads, especially if you pass through Newtown or Maho, actually empty out. So it is good to have you here tonight. Let us focus on those who are here. I will have to have a word with the Bishop of Roseau in terms of the planning of his own events, so that he will prioritize accordingly. So, and of course, I recognize the Marketing and Outreach Officer, Ms. Kimon Joseph, who really is the mover and the shaker in all of this tonight. Thank you very much, Kimon. You might say that you're getting paid, but the fact is that I think you really do a fine job. Last night, I said to a colleague in the UE Open Campus that we were going to launch the Edward Oliver Leblanc Distinguished Lecture Series tonight, October 4th, 2012. I added very quickly that this would mean that in Dominica, we can now speak proudly about having 4 scheduled or programmed distinguished or memorial lectures per annum. She responded succinctly and genuinely. 4 annual lectures is impressive. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely believe so myself. If I should say so myself, it is impressive. To be sure, it would be impressive if any faculty, institute, or relevant department at a residential brick-and-mortar campus were to mount 4 annual lectures, let alone a site in what we previously referred to as a non-campus country, a term we have thankfully abolished in our UWI lexicon. But ladies and gentlemen, simply abolishing terminology and jargon is immaterial if we do not transform the oratory into actual programs and initiatives on the ground. It would be meaningless if we did not attempt to meet people where they are by bringing education to them, be it formal, non-formal, or informal. I am pleased to say that the UWI Open Campus has been attempting to respond to the needs of our UWI 12 countries by introducing programs, for example, that seek to address gaps in our societies, whose attempts to develop are thwarted by crime and violence, juvenile delinquency, unemployment generally, but especially among our youth, asymmetrical socialization of our children, domestic violence, gender prejudice, political indiscretions, including alienating those who have a significant part to play in their society that is already bereft of educated and skilled people, and other such crises, I might say crimes. The launching in academic year 2012-2013 of programs such as the Bachelor of Education in Early Childhood Development and Family Studies, and the Bachelor of Science degree in Youth Development Work are 2 examples of programs that the Open Campus introduced specifically in response to demands from our previously underserved societies that were impatient for lack of attention. We are very pleased also with the number of graduates that have emerged from the Dominica site with certificates in criminology and early childhood education and development for both teachers and administrators. These, my dear ladies and gentlemen, are practical responses to reasonable demands from our communities. The students and graduates of these programs are certainly not from what we persuasively refer to as quote-unquote bourgeois families. They are ordinary Dominicans attempting to lead decent lives and earn a fair day's wage for a fair day's pay. They are Dominicans who would not have had a chance of achieving good quality education from a good quality institution with 64 years of pedigree. If you think I am kidding, ask the gentleman who is our guest lecturer tonight, who was born at the same time or in the same year of his alma mater. I hope I'm not divulging too much, but I've said that publicly before, and he has said it already, so this is no secret. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very proud and not a little comforted tonight to see the Edward Oliver Leblanc Distinguished Lecture Series become a reality. We promised to add this series to the illustrious tradition, and we are delivering tonight on that promise. We are continuing a very proud tradition of annual lectures, which we started in 2006 with the Dame Eugenia Charles Distinguished Lecture Series. It would be inappropriate for any other institution to break through the frontiers in this regard. We thought that we needed a partner in government, and the Division of Culture was the choice by natural selection, if you will accept a socio-biological analogy. In that regard, I want to thank Mr. Raymond Lawrence, the Chief Cultural Officer, for so enthusiastically embracing this partnership. I am also aware that he would have had to have the blessings of the government of Dominica, the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sports, and the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports. I want to publicly express my thanks to the Ministry for agreeing to collaborate. This relationship must be a model of how we ought to proceed in Dominica, a very small country which will thrive only if we work in partnership. We are proud to launch this series with a son of the soil, Dr. Alwin Bully. It was while interviewing him last year in my preparation of the citation for the conferral on Dr. Bully of an honorary Doctor of Letters from his alma mater that I learned of the close relationship between his family and that of Honorable Edward Oliver Leblanc. I was fascinated by the memoirs he shared and concluded there and then that he was eminently qualified to deliver the inaugural lecture. Thank you, Dr. Bully and Anita Bully, whose blessings you enjoy. I see that again. I have a special place in my heart for the family of Premier the Honorable Edward Oliver Leblanc, because my father would have at some point in time worked with him as a senior public servant, either as permanent secretary or chief establishment officer. Dr. Lennox Honeychurch can confirm either way. And then I also want, as I mentioned Dr. Honeychurch, to also thank him publicly for collaborating with us on this. He's one of those who will provide the intellectual sort of backative or scaffolding or framework in terms of how we proceed with this lecture. And I have to tell you, which I'm sure you already know, because you are quite informed people, that Dr. Lennox Honeychurch will be conferred the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa at the third or the fourth graduation ceremony of the Open Campus, which is due to be held on October 13th. That is next week, Saturday. And again, proud that another Dominican has been recognized in that regard. And I feel especially proud to be the one to be reading the citation as a public orator of the UWI Open Campus. But it was so refreshing to interact with two members of the Liberal family at the graduation ceremony of the Open Campus last year in Antigua. The UWI had received their blessings then, as I had broached the matter of the lecture with them. We're happy that the family is well represented tonight, and I want you to give the family a big round of applause. I cannot say I know the family very well. I do not belong to Mr. Wilson's generation. I come after. But I have to say, observing from afar, these are very gracious and graceful people. Their father, husband, uncle, whatever, grandfather, has made a significant contribution to the Commonwealth of Dominica. It's well known, well loved, but they carry themselves as simple, graceful people. That is what I observed as an onlooker. Tonight, we all join under the auspices of the UWI Open Campus Dominica and the Division of Culture in celebrating the life and achievements of a great Dominican in the life of his people. His achievements included, inter alia, education, social services, infrastructure, preservation of land for Dominicans, audacious nationalism, Caribbean unity, among others. I assure everyone that the University of the West Indies will not relent in its mission of educating the people of Dominica, formally, informally, and non-formally. It is sometimes an uncomfortable mission because not everyone is at ease and secure when the minds of the masses are open, no pun intended. This is what the Open Campus is all about, open. But Premier Edward Oliver Leblanc would have been happy with our efforts tonight, not because he sought self-aggrandizement, but because we're engaging in what he dedicated his political life to, building a nation of decent people with high self-esteem and national pride, and where social divisions were merely artificial or man-made barriers that were unsustainable and counterproductive. I look forward with alacrity to hearing more about this decent politician of the past through the thoughts of another decent man via the topic, the Gilded Mango, Culture, Livelihoods and Development in Dominica, 1950 to 2012. Before I conclude, I look out into the audience and I see Auntie Pearl. Now, I am saying that for two reasons. I don't flatter anyone, but partly because I want to flatter, because I've been trying to get into university singers. Not university singers. That's always in my mind. And that might be a Freudian slip, huh? Yes, we could take over. We could take over, because you need to be university singers. But the Cicero singers. But Auntie Pearl has been paying me no mind. She just smiles. I suspect she doesn't want to let me down by telling me that I am a bit over the age, approaching the cusp of old age. But Auntie Pearl, if you tell me that, I will take it graciously and like a man. But welcome tonight. Welcome tonight. And Mr. Wilson, your audience is growing, and I think we have what you can refer to as a decent and pleasant crowd to begin and to kick off what is going to become part of the calendar of Dominica, especially during Independence Time, the Edward Oliver Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Anyway, I think it gives me great pleasure to invite the son of Edward Oliver, Leblanc, Iwat. Leblanc, Iwat. Iwat.
Thank you, Felix. Not that I would, even if I tried, but I really want to say that it's always a pleasure visiting Dominica on vacation, and this was coincidental, so I'm very thrilled to be here. And also, you know, like I said a few years ago when I was here for National Day, you can take a man out of Dominica, but you can never take Dominica out of a man. Anyway, so it was also a pleasure seeing some friends I hadn't seen for quite a while, and I'm not going to go to litany because I want to get to the main thing tonight. But being the eldest child of E.O. Leblanc, I had a privilege and a vantage point from which to observe this enigmatic individual. I saw what made him tick, what made him go, and what made him pause for reflection. Some things not privy to the general public that even some members of the family or his inner circle of friends were unaware of. I was up front and center, and to many stories that have been published by notable scholars such as Dr. Honeychurch, Mr. Julian Johnson, Gabriel Christian, and of course Dr. Irvin Andre, who wrote his biography. A more recent publication in a US college text called Men of the Global South. My daughter was in college and she called me up and she said, Dad, Grandpa is on the cover of a textbook that came out of Yale University. And I purchased the book, and in there it was a very interesting discussion. It was by a gentleman called Professor Douglas Midget, who was a Peace Corps many years ago, and he had interviewed my father. And I did call him, and he was, after I read the text, and it was very interesting, you know, his reflection on my father and the greatness of the man. And the title of his essay was The Creole Master. And it was based on a recorded interview about how, and he chronicled how he had really outsmarted the British in building the coastal road, now called the E.O. Leblanc Highway. So yesterday, for the first time, I drove on the road, and I'll tell you, no potholes. It was really nice. So I would really like to thank the Prime Minister, the government, and people of Dominica for really honoring him for that. And you could read the article for yourself. Actually, I was given full rights to have it republished if anybody's interested. Besides his unyielding determination to build a great nation, he was passionate about the liberalization of education and the promotion of culture in his nation-building quest. To achieve his mission and vision, he listened, he gathered information, he understood the gaps, and was very decisive and unwavering in charting a course of action. As I mentioned at Dr. Zandri's launch of the biography in Toronto in 2005, Edward Leblanc always drew a line in the sand so he never had to keep walking on the edge. Some of his decisions have been very well documented. If you could trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. These are lines from Rudyard Kipling's poem If, which we had to commit by heart, and some nights after maybe a cocktail we would have to recite one stanza, and we had to know it very well. I was visiting him the year before he passed, and he was at the hospital, and we were talking about politics and philosophy and the things he normally liked to talk about. And he asked me, have you read the book by Isaac Asimov, The Relativity of Wrong? And I said, I don't read Asimov, he's an atheist. And he looked at me from his bedside and he said, son, there's more faith in a little doubt than blind acceptance. And I put that in the proverbial pipe and I smoked it. Being his first child, again, I had the privilege to see and understand his idiosyncrasies, he took me along on campaigns. He had a Willis Jeep. It was a reconditioned Army Jeep, and we went through mountains, hills, rivers. I remember one time we had water in a river right up to almost the waist, and that Jeep just kept moving. Occasionally he would have me type his speeches on an old Remington typewriter. Now, we didn't have computers like today, so it was very slow typing. And the key thing is I had absolutely no editorial rights. I also rode on the back of his vintage BSA motorcycle and going fishing sometimes and doing the things that he liked to do. I remember the exact spot where I was the first person he told when he had dismissed 3 ministers, and I was the first person he told about it, and I was going to grammar school at the time. I could take you to Monbruce at the exact spot, because when he told me that, I said, well, why is he telling me the first thing? And then I thought, but I couldn't say it. I said, is he nuts? But, he knew what he was doing. I recall a meeting with Robert Douglas and Jenna Amo at Mont Cottage to strategize with the Canadian government to free Ruzi after the George William University affair. And it was very interesting. I mean, he was fully committed as a Dominican to put the full support of government behind that. When Dr. Timothy Leary was deported from Dominica, I was up front and center in some of the things that were happening, and I was not supposed to have been there, but I overheard some things. And when Dr. Leary arrived in New York, he was arrested. But everything he did, he took very seriously. In summary, I can vouch for many of the things that have been said and written about him, his leadership style, his politics, his smarts, his ethics, his selflessness, humility, and his role as custodian in charge of preserving and nurturing the culture of Dominica. What he is less known for was his deep affinity for writing and poetry, which we'll hear a little more about later from Dr. Bully. Whether he was writing about his teacher, his mother, or a piece where Mrs. Sabine, the central character in the poet, The Philosophy of Life, I believe he wrote as a safety valve to unleash the many thoughts that must have preoccupied his mind, even at an early age. It is therefore timely that is being honored through the lecture series, the purpose for which we are here today. I would like to acknowledge the presence of my sister, my daughter, uncles and aunts, and cousins, and who are present here this evening. I and my siblings and family therefore want to thank the government again for honoring him in many ways. And finally, I want to thank the University of the West Indies, Dr. Francis Severin, Mr. Felix Wilson, and Dr. Alwin Bully for presenting the first Edward Oliver Leblanc Distinguished Lecture on the Culture, Livelihood, and Development of Dominica. Alwin was a close friend of the family and my father, and particularly during his retirement years, he shared some healthy discourse with each other on matters relating to the history and advancement of Dominica. I have no doubt that this distinguished son of the soil, Dr. Bully, will do a masterful job in this lecture. Thank you, and may God bless Dominica.
My alma mater, but more so Dr. Severin, you're almost alone, because everybody I'll call to the podium went to the Dominica Grammar School. I now call on another Dominica Grammar School student, that is Raymond Lawrence, Chief Cultural Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Let me recognize the presence of the Honorable Minister for Culture, Youth and Sports Services, Community Development and Gender Affairs, Mrs. Gloria Shillingford. Dr. Francis Severin, now the Director of the Open Campus, Open Sites. Mr. Felix Alwin Bully, our guest lecturer here this evening. Members of the Leblanc family, including Ewart and Erin. Staff members of the UE Open Campus, including Kimon Joseph, Projects Officer Gregory Rabes, special invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and let me add my welcome to all of you to this evening's lecture, forming part, initiating and organizing this significant lecture, and to say that the Cultural Division is indeed very pleased to be partnering with the UE Open Campus in this lecture series, commemorating and celebrating the life of the late, great Edward Oliver Leblanc. The theme for this year's Independence celebrations, as we all know, is partnering for further progress and development, and in keeping with the theme, it's great to be partnering with the UE Open Campus in organizing this lecture. I was asked to introduce our lecturer. Let me begin by saying that I think I've known Alwin Bully practically all my life. I remember him acting in school plays and then being involved with what used to be called a little theater at the time. I acted with this group as well, and then I would go on to work with him by acting in some of his plays with the People's Action Theater, including P.O.P.O. and his production of Jesus Christ Superstar. And then when the Cultural Division was established in 1978, and when the then government asked me to return home from Montserrat, where I was working with Radio Antilles, I asked to join the Culture Department. And so in 1982, I joined Alwin and Pearl Christian as part of the division and worked directly with Alwin until 1987, when he left to take up a UNESCO position in Jamaica. So my involvement in culture has certainly been influenced by Alwin Bully, who was always willing to give advice and assistance. But it's certainly a privilege for me to have to introduce him here this evening. Alwin has certainly distinguished himself in the fields of culture and education. He is a cultural icon in his own right and a man of great stature and achievements, Dr. Alwin Bully. Dr. Bully received his Bachelor of Arts degree in English and French from the UE Cave Hill campus in Barbados in 1971. He was president of the Guild of Undergraduate Students at Cave Hill in 1970. From 1971 to 1978, Dr. Bully served as a member of staff of the Dominica Grammar School, and during his tenure there he served as head of the English department, deputy principal, and also acting principal of the school. He designed the national flag of Dominica in 1978. He was the first chief cultural officer of Dominica from 1978 to 1987, and UNESCO advisor for culture in Jamaica from 1987 to 2006. From 2008 to 2010, Dr. Bully was the cultural advisor to the government of Dominica. In 2011, he was awarded the Honorary Doctor of Letters by the University of the West Indies. He is a member of the Dominica Festivals Committee and former chair of the Dominica National Emblems Committee. He serves as chairman of the Carnival Organizing Committee and the Nature Island Literary Festival and Book Fair. Dr. Bully has been involved in culture practically all his life. He was a director of the Little Theatre, which I mentioned earlier, together with Daniel Corderon, and in the 1970s founded his own theatre group, the People's Action Theatre, and with this group was able to produce several successful and outstanding plays like Streak, Nightbox, Ruler in Hyruna, Pio Pio, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Folk Nativity. Dr. Bully can be described as a consummate artist. Apart from being a playwright and a director, he has been involved in the designing and making of carnival costumes and also carnival bands. He's also an artist, an actor, a songwriter, a choreographer, and a poet. Dr. Bully has received many awards and honors both here and regionally. Some of these include the Cicero Award of Honor in 1985, the Golden Drum Award in 1997, and the UWI Alumni Award for Excellence in 2008. Dr. Bully has certainly had an illustrious career, and his contribution to the development of culture and education in Dominica and the region is indeed outstanding and exemplary. So tonight we're honored to have Dr. Bully deliver a lecture on culture and the role of the late great Edward Oliver Leblanc in Dominica's development. This lecture is the first as part of the E.O. Leblanc lecture series organized by the UWI Open Campus in collaboration with the Cultural Division and an event forming part of the Independence celebrations. And what a relevant time to stage this lecture. The Independence celebrations evolved out of the National Day celebration, which was initiated and pioneered by E.O. Leblanc. Dr. Bully has entitled his lecture tonight, Gilded Mango, Culture, Livelihoods, and Development in Dominica. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Alwin Bully.
Thank you very much, Raymond, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Minister of Sports, Youth and Culture, Mrs. Justina Charles. Honorable Minister for Gender Affairs, Social Services and Community Development, Ms. Gloria Schlenkford. At the head table, Mr. Felix Wilson, the acting head of the UWI Open Campus of Dominica. Dr. Francis Severin, Director of the Open Campus Country Sites, acting. The members of the Leblanc family, a very dear family to me, as we've been hearing over the last few minutes. And especially Mr. Ewart Oliver Leblanc, who gave the opening remarks on behalf of the family. Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond Lawrence, again for your introduction. I'd like to thank Ms. Kimon Joseph, PR Manager of the UWI Open Campus, for excellent work over the last few years preparing for this particular event. My dear wife, Anita, who was without commissioner. So here we are with her. So Brian, Aline, and Miss Lady Aline, and dear friends, so many of you I'm glad to see here tonight. As I know you're talking about the room not being full, but there's just some very special people who are here this evening. It makes it feel so wonderful to be part of this particular event. Roger, I know what it's like going up the road to Antrim after 6 o'clock, and you're here. Thank you for being here. I'd like to acknowledge also former Cabinet Secretary Mr. Felix Gregoire for being here with us tonight, and our close friends, of course, my dear brother and his wife, Colin and Tony. In preparing this address, as you can see, as you have heard, the topic is the Gilded Mango, Culture, Livelihoods and Development. And something very strange happens to me very often when I'm writing, especially when I'm writing creatively, especially when I'm writing plays, that it seems that the characters in the play, especially in the case of plays, take over and begin telling me the lines. And after a while, all I find myself doing is really taking dictation. So that after the play is written, you look at it and you know, you don't suspect, you know that you really didn't write this play. It was written by some other people or some other voices or some other entities. I think the ancient Greeks referred to them as muses, who might take over and decide what it is that you write. And something very similar happened in writing this play, this particular address, in that the intent of the title kind of shifted as I went along, and possibly it could have been the spirit and the energy of our dear friend E.O. Leblanc, who basically directed the course of this particular presentation tonight. So it's in fact an honor and a privilege, and I'd like to start where most people end addresses, by thanking the Open Campus, the University of the West Indies Open Campus in Dominica, for granting me the honor and the privilege of delivering this inaugural E.O. Leblanc Distinguished Lecture Series. And tonight I'll be talking on the cultural impact of Edward Oliver Leblanc on Dominica, his administration and how it was based so much on cultural objectives and cultural parameters. And as you must all know, this is the third in the Distinguished Lecture Series. The other two that I know of so far are the Dr. Bernard Sorrento series on health and wellness in general, and the Dame Mary Eugenia Charles series on politics in particular. As was pointed out earlier by Dr. Severin, the various aspects of interest, or various areas of interest that Edward Oliver Leblanc was involved with or had, were so vast and so varied that no particular one has been allocated to this particular series. So there'll be culture, there'll be social affairs, there'll be politics, there'll be land use, etc., that has been spoken about. But because I'm not competent in these other fields, and my relationship with Mr. Leblanc was really through culture, I'll speak tonight about his interest in the arts and culture. So it will be primarily concerned with matters of identity, nationalism, and the major influence that he had on his approach to politics and governance, as well as the shaping of Dominica into the ideal country based on his particular vision, hopes and aspirations. So while the lecture will be about culture in the broad sense, the broad and narrow senses of the word, I'll also make comments in the context of Mr. Leblanc's cultural perspective, theories, and actions. To talk of his political life would call for several lectures by political analysts and commentators far more competent than myself. So as I said, from now I'll speak from my personal knowledge of and my relationship with him, which took place after he had given up politics and retired completely and unapologetically to a simple life in his simple home by the sea in Opa in Descartes. Our connection was apolitical and actually started through his sons, Ewart, Einstein, Wordsworth, and Eustace, all of whom I taught as a young teacher at the Dominica Grammar School. You may not think so, looking at Ewart, or even at Felix himself, who was also one of my students. But it is a fact So that tells you where to put me. Later on, I met his daughter Erin and his wife Ethel, and by now you two are aware of the obsession with the initial E in the first name of all the family members. As he never struck me as a superstitious man, I can only put it down to his poetic bent, the alliteration effect of the repeated vowel when naming the entire clan in quick succession, as in Edward Ethel, Ewart, Erin, and Ellsworth Eustace. Mr. Leblanc was a poet through and through, and a highly lyrical one at that. In 1947, at the age of 34, the publishing house Van Nostrand published two of his poems in an anthology entitled Young American Poet and Songwriter. His poem, Vade Mecum, is dedicated to his deceased mother, who he loved very dearly, is selected among the top 25 out of 335 entries. The poem, which we must all read, is an outstanding piece of work, which basically has to do with his connection with both his mother and his wife. It's set in the graveyard in Acres, evening of All Saints' Day. The graves are all lit with candles, and gradually, as the various families leave the graveyard, he stays behind to communicate with his mother. And this was very special for him because in those days when his mother passed away, he was actually working as an agricultural officer in the botanical gardens. And the way you got to Portsmouth, or Acres, I should say, by Portsmouth in those days, was by launch, which left at certain times. And as there was no Lyndhurst in those days, burials had to take place within 24 hours. So when he got to Acres, his mother was already buried, which practically broke his heart. So this particular occasion, a year after her death, approximately, he's in the graveyard and has a sort of vision of her telling him, "Don't worry, I know you love me, but there's somebody else who your love must pass on to, who is your wife. So do not be upset about the fact that you still love me so much. I understand. You have my permission, so to speak." And his wife appears, then comes to find him, they embrace, and he's comforted by it. A very beautiful piece of work. A few months after this poem was published, he received a letter from an American singer complimenting him on his poetry, inviting him to write songs for him, for the singer, with a proposed arrangement that they would share the royalties 50-50. Edward Oliver Leblanc crushed the letter into a ball and threw it into the waste paper basket, muttering that he wrote poetry for pleasure, not for profit. When asked, and it must have been his dear wife Ethel asking, who did the letter come from, practically mumbled and flippantly answered, "Oh, Perry Como." Now for the younger members of the audience, Perry Como in the 50s when this incident took place, the 40s, was a mega superstar singer of tremendous stature and fame. And yet, Mr. Leblanc was not interested in writing songs for Perry Como. He wrote for pleasure. In the mid-60s, he self-published a collection of 26 poems, forward by Alex Lazar. Always the self-effacing artist, he wrote in the preface, "The circumstances which impel me to take such a daring step, I hope, may urge you to read, not for information, but for amusement, although these hackneyed lines could hardly aspire to such distinguished honor." And pointing out that some of the poems were written when he was just 17 years old, he added, "The youth has written. You, dear reader, take your share of responsibility to read and criticize, open to criticism. His poetic skills were honed on the likes of Shakespeare, Wordsworth, and the great poets of the English language. His children will tell you that he had a quotation from some famous writer always ready on the tip of his tongue for practically every situation or circumstance that might ever arise. As you had just told you, the situation in the hospital, immediately he had something to say appropriate to the situation. And if you were bold enough to quote one of these lines to him in order to win an argument, he was just as ready with another quotation contradicting the former one. As an example, Eustace once congratulated himself on a job well done. And E.O. was quick to admonish him with a stern line, "It profiteth not a man to blow his own trumpet." But when a few days later Eustace caught his father congratulating himself in a similar manner and reminded him not to blow his own trumpet, E.O. was quick to come back with an apt quotation from Shakespeare. "Self-praise, my liege, is not so vile a sin as self-neglect." The family tells us that Mr. Leblanc was constantly reciting lines and full poems from the great poets of the English language. At home, driving in his Ford car all over the country, and even while working in their garden, vegetable garden, under the blazing sun. The poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling was required learning for the entire family for its intrinsic value as English poetry at its best, as well as for much of the major life lessons it teaches. The only member of the family who was not required to learn the line was his wife, Ethel. And when I speak with especially the boys about it, they say, "Mommy heard it so many times that she learned it anyway." I give you the entire poem so that you might understand why he thought it was so important that his children knew every line by heart. If you can keep your head when all about, maybe you were going to say if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men comfort you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. You read Kipling. And I guess Erin has to say you'd be a woman. A stickler for the use of correct grammar, standard English, and use of creative language, he was equally adept at prose as he was with poetry. He had actually started a novel, which he never finished, an unfinished novel entitled Sin in Paradise. But somewhere along the way he seemed to have lost interest in it. The protagonist was becoming to get too much like him, like himself, he told me. And he seemed to be no mood to make it into an autobiography. So when his son Einstein offered to help him finish it Saturday, he dismissed the idea that Kurt go and write your own book. He had clearly decided not to return to that problem. His concern for constructive and meaningful ideas in art was further demonstrated when he collaborated with the composer of the national anthem, W.O.M. Pond, about the writing of the third verse. Mr. Pond had originally written 2 verses, both of which extolled the natural beauty of the island. Mr. Leblanc felt the need to address the citizens of a land beyond compare, so rallying crowds called to participate fully in all aspects of development of the homeland. He worked with Mr. Pond on the construction of the third verse, which in the opinion of many is the crowning piece of the anthem. It was an exhilarating call to all Dominicans to fight for honor and justice, to do the right, to be firm and fair. It exhorts us to work not only with hands but also with heart, thereby implying willing heart, joyful heart, conscientious heart, and joyful, that is, to use the power of speech and the expression of ideas for national development, to speak out for what we believe in, as well as for what is good for our country. We must foster, stand tall, he said, a stern reminder that this is our duty to use all our resources in order to achieve prosperity and advancement. It is also a call to which we must rejoice, that this prosperity must be achieved through unity, cooperation, spirit of agreement, working together and standing up for each other, as it is so emphatically expressed in the final catchphrase, all for each. All. As a young man in Decad, had established a literary club much in the style of the Dale Carnegie Foundation, with regular lectures, debates, and elocution contests, as well as the encouragement of writing skills. But Mr. Leblanc was not obsessed only with the literary arts. He equally was enamored with the performing arts as expressed in the folk traditions of the island. He had a particular love for the quadrilles and other square dances and set dances which he grew up with in the village, and this was no love as a spectator, but actually as love of a participant. He was also an adept dancer of several of these square dances, which were danced in his living room, not as a performance to be viewed from the sidelines, but as a form of partying, and everyone is expected to take a turn or two on the floor in the course of the evening. So on the occasion of the christening of Lizzie, who happens to be my goddaughter, we were all expected to join in the quadrille dances that particular evening. Of course, I'd never danced a quadrille before in my life, so it was on-the-spot learning, much to his amusement. He also had a great love for drama. In the early 1950s, when he was president of the VCAD 4-H Club, he organized a number of dramatic performances, the best known of which was called Leave Stephen for Helen, written and directed and starring E.O. Leblanc in the role of Stephen, with a co-star in the role of Helen, no other than Bethel Patrick, who was soon to become Mrs. Leblanc. He also directed scenes from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. In the 1970s, he attended most of the plays of the People's Action Theatre, which I directed at the time, if not all of them. often sending comments to me via one or the other of his sons, who were members of the People's Action Theatre itself. Nothing escaped his sharp eye for detail. For example, he sent to tell me that Mikey Bruni's puppet Tig costume in the independent folk opera Pio Pio had its tail positioned too low, and that it would be a lot more realistic if positioned higher up. Of course, I promptly complied and was amazed at the results. He felt that the playwright played a more important role in society than the actor. Wise men write plays, he once said to me. Jesters act. The playwright has something to say to his community, which could also be said to the world, while the actor was merely his mouthpiece, he explained. But deep down, I know he was sure, I was quite sure that he knew that without the actor, the playwright is nothing. His love of music was also evident through the many Jingping bands that played at parties at his home, but in his official capacity as premier as well. And for the first time in that capacity, the government of Dominica gave support to bands and singers entering the modern world of recording and, by extension, cultural industries. In writing about the struggles of the music industry in Dominica, artist and cultural commentator Dennis Joseph had this to say: "In the days of the Gaylord's Power Union, it took me months to raise money for cutting our first album. The idea that a white Kubuli group could actually come up with an album was greeted with a skepticism and even derision that would shock the world today. As we are now familiar with local albums, many of them. But the government of Edward Leblanc believed that there was a distinctive place for musicians in the scheme of things, and responded to our desperate requests with actual cash from a special fund set up by him to aid the musicians of this land move forward. Otherwise, the Gaylord's Power Union may have had to pull up the brakes and fold up tents, and lovely Dominica may never have been recorded. Other groups, like the Siffle Montaigne Chorale, benefited from that fund and the vision of Leblanc." Unquote. When entertaining as premier at the official residence at Mont Bruce, he often hired the Gaylords and the Siffle Montaigne Chorale for displays of Dominican culture. He enjoyed cadence music, and we all believe that he is an ardent fan of Ophelia's. A fluent speaker of Creole, despite the fact that he wrote in such formal English when he wrote his poetry. He valued the uniqueness of the Creole language, its turn of phrase, its wry humor, and its expressive qualities. He understood this language as the essence of the folk traditions that he loved so much, the essence of the music and the dance, the contes and the wakes, the village feast days, the Christmas serenades, the christenings, the weddings, the funerals, the cuisine, the national wear, the beliefs and the mythologies, the spirits of the Kudme, of people working together, of people helping people, the good old standards of decency and mutual respect as were taught by his dear teacher Sorrento. He recognized their intrinsic value as well as their fragility, tottering as they were in the 1950s between a world of the past when simple pastimes brought joy to simple folk living simple lives, and the fast approaching modernity of the second half of the 20th century with its rapidly developing technology and telecommunication systems with which powerful countries could shape the thinking of millions of people in a few short years. He realized that the future of those traditions and that creolity lay in his hands, that he would have to act fast if they were to survive. His method was to embrace the concept of Creole nationalism as espoused by Dr. Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago and other leaders in the region. He found a kindred spirit in Mabel Sissy Corderon, who had been like a lone voice crying in the wilderness where the preservation of Dominica's folk arts and culture were concerned. She would support him in one of his greatest acts of national significance, the establishment in 1965 of what was first called Dies Dominica, then Dominica Day, but which eventually settled, especially here in the heart of the as National Day. A great celebration of the culture of the island with all things positively valued. To quote Dr. Lennox Honeychurch's paper on the subject, the main concept of Creole nationalism was to bring together the diverse ethnic, social, and economic groups in the nation state, and to create a unifying ideal that was encapsulated by the term Creole. It indicated all those groups and things which emerged from the Caribbean experience. In Jamaica, it was incorporated in the national motto, out of many, one people. The path opened by Dr. Eric Williams inspired leaders up and down the Eastern Caribbean. National awards, best village competitions, the publication of national histories, the research and renewal of folklore and folkloric arts, forms of dance, song, music, dress and culinary skills became part of a national cultural agenda. But where else was the Caribbean people to turn to in the mid-20th century for inspiration, other than to the folk? Where in the exploitative past could people turn to for figures of admiration and for role models? As Gordon Lewis states in his book, Main Currents in Caribbean Thought, the record was too bleak. Consequently, the growth of any national character mythology came to settle upon the Caribbean common man as its representative type. In such various ways, the protagonists of the spirit of the Caribbean, cultural nationalism, came to be the man and woman of the Caribbean street, the little man, so to speak, in the case of Dominica, the man or woman of the farm or the village. Both Leblanc and Coderon were inspired by the life of the people of Dominica, the island upon which the heritage had unfolded. Their ideas and their actions overlapped. In the 1960s, when Edward Oliver Leblanc was Chief Minister and Premier of Dominica, and Mabel Sissy Coderon was at the peak of her creativity in what also tragically were the last years of her life. Both were cultural activists, one with the political power to implement, the other with the powers of persuasion and inspiration in a society balanced between its past and its first steps into a very different future. In this single action of establishing the National Day celebrations, the folk traditions of our country were preserved for generations yet unborn. Dominica was defined as a nature island of the Caribbean, and a stronghold of a living culture that would take its place as the soul and spirit of the island nature. He felt the island to be better prepared to face the challenges of the approaching years, and he was right, except that he could not have imagined the enormity of some of the challenges that were to come. I said a moment ago that culture is the soul and the spirit of the nation, but I also would like to exchange that metaphor for another one, more tangible, one you can touch and feel and smell and taste, like a mango. I would like you to think of our culture, the spirit of our culture, of our country, as a ripe, juicy, delicious mango born from a huge tree whose roots go deep and spread to the far corners of the world. It was this mango that E.O. Leblanc recognized in the 1950s as a fruit of choice to sustain the healthy growth and sustainable development of an island nation like ours in the middle of the 20th century. He understood that unless the people loved the land and had a spiritual connection to it, there was little chance of them working with hands and hearts and voices. So in 1965, when we were just about recovering from the failed federation, and we were starting to take the first steps towards sovereignty, self-governance, and independence, the process of gilding the mango began. That is, the glorification of our culture, the prerequisite for national development. It was a time of great uncertainty. But these small islands of the Eastern Caribbean were prepared to step bravely into the unknown with the hope of returning triumphant, like the starring, to use a good Dominican term, the starring of a movie at the spanking new Carib cinema. Never mind the fact that the Caribs or the Kalinago people were seldom seen there. But it was a bold step which was inevitable. Independence and self-governance seemed our only chance. It was a matter of swim or sink, and sinking was not an option for Mr. Leblanc. He had been through it all. He knew the hardships of colonialism and poverty. The story goes that in the 1940s, Mrs. Elma Napier, driving her jeep along a rugged country road in the north of the island, came across a young man who had injured his leg having fallen off his motorcycle. He was angry, not with himself, but with the road, and throughout the long drive to the Portsmouth Hospital, he kept swearing that one day he would ensure that there were proper roads in the island of Dominica. It is therefore a fitting tribute to him that the West Coast Highway, linking Roseau to Portsmouth, bears his name today. So the decade of the 50s opened with hope and determination, carried on the shoulder of energetic and visionary young men like Leblanc of Dominica, Manley of Jamaica, Williams of Trinidad and Tobago, Adams of Barbados, Compton of St. Lucia, and women like Phyllis Shant Alfrey, all of whom led us into the West Indies Federation in 1958. For many, it was a dream come true. The logical, sensible way forward for 10 small Caribbean islands to face the rigors of fast approaching globalization. It heralded the first wave of nation building in a regional context, and at that celebration in the federal capital of Port of Spain, Caribbean culture was on full display, again as the spirit of the region, the Gilded Mango of the mind. At this festivity, Dominica was represented by Côte d'Ivoire's Kairi artistic troupe, singing in Creole and displaying the beauty of the Wab duet and the jig. Following the event, the Governor General of the Federation, Lord Hales, sent Mrs. Côte d'Ivoire a special letter of congratulations for Dominica's outstanding performance in Trinidad. The other outstanding performance being Derek Walcott's Drums and Colors with a pan-Caribbean cast featuring the likes of Errol Jones, Peter Minshall, and Easton Lee. But the dream was short-lived, and it soon morphed into a nightmare in 4 short years. The rift between Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica over the site of the federal capital mushroomed into an outright conflict of ideological and operational methodologies, which ended with Jamaica's secession from the Federation in 1962. And Eric Williams' famous summing up of the situation, 1 from 10 equals 0. With Jamaica leading the way, one by one the islands moved into full sovereignty. Smaller ones like Dominica, the Windward Islands and the Leeward Islands making a brief stop in associated statehood from 1967 before assuming full independence. Dominica's new flag was hoisted on November 3rd, 1978, turning that date, which had once been Discovery Day and National Day, into Independence Day. The problem facing the nation was how to build up the faith of the population in the new nationalism and gain their participation in nation building. Once again, the leaders turned to culture to do the job. The only problem was that Leblanc was no longer leading the nation, and where culture was concerned, no one seemed to have the Leblanc touch, or at least their vision appeared to be focused on strategies other than culture. The hope of the 50s having been dashed with the failure of the Federation, the great new hope of the 60s and the 70s was that each of the countries concerned, islands mainly, with the exception of Guyana and Belize, would be a success in their own right, now that they had full reign over their own affairs and they could do as they please and make their way in the world unencumbered by the appendages that other countries in the grouping could tend to be. But before any of that could happen, they had to assert their own identity, their own brand, which would mark them as being special, call it better, if you want, than the rest. So once more, the flame of hope was lit, and there was a great flowering of the arts up and down the region. Jamaica, the folk mental band morphed into rocksteady, then into ska, then into rude boy, and finally into reggae, where it found its great poet in the person of Robert Nesta Marley, who went on to create a worldwide music revolution. Writers and artists and sculptors began crawling out of the woodwork. Dancers, actors, storytellers, and musicians became celebrities overnight. Thinkers and cultural philosophers like Rex Nettleford became leaders and advisors to leaders. The leaders like Michael Manley and Edward Siaga were themselves qualified experts in the field of culture, history, and anthropology. The entire country began to experience a rejuvenation of spirit, self-confidence, and love of country as never before, all as a result of serious cultural programs and support on the part of their government. In Trinidad and Tobago, a similar blossoming was taking place with the steel band, the development of soca and chutney music, and the taking of carnival to new levels by designers such as George Bailey, Stephen Leon, Edmund Hart, Wayne Barkley, Peter Mitchell. Derek Walcott of St. Lucia was creating the Trinidad Theatre Workshop and taking Caribbean drama and literature to the metropolitan centers of the world. In the Windward and Leeward Islands, a great searching for the roots of a culture and a memory and a minor celebration of arts began. But because Dominica had already begun the process since 1965, we were well ahead of the game. In fact, Jamaica and Trinidad, Dominica had started creating new musical forms since the late 60s, starting with the Gaylords Power Union, followed by the Siffle Mountain Chorale, Exile One, and Gramax, to name just a few. Canas Lipso created a veritable musical transformation throughout the Creolophone world and gave rise to several derivatives, including zouk and compa. But the musical explosion that took place in the 1970s had its problems in Dominica. A small island like this, with a diminishing population of about 80,000 in those years, was unable to sustain the 18 bands that existed here at the height of the music era. They soon migrated mainly to the French islands, then to the French mainland, then to Africa, then to the rest of the diaspora. And soon, once again, in about the mid-80s, there was just about one band at all, the faithful Swinging Stars. Not composing much new music, but certainly playing great music. The time had come for a new wave of young musicians with new rhythms in Leblanc. This did not take long to materialize, and they called the rhythm bouillon. The newest beat, which in my opinion is still evolving, searching for its great poets and its world audience. But the question is, if in 25 years it has not yet transformed itself, can it still do so now? Can it be other than what it is now? And is it symptomatic of the present state of culture in Dominica? And just what is the present state of culture in Dominica? So far we have been talking about the Leblanc revolution, cultural revolution of the 1960s, in the narrow sense of the word culture, that is, the arts. While the arts reflect to a large extent the general mores, attitudes, and levels of consciousness of the population, they still exist only as part of the full scope of life and all that it entails when one refers to the culture of a people or a country. So after 34 years of independence and the various bouts of gilding and ungilding the mango of our culture, what is the product that we now hold in our hands right now and here, and call it our culture? And how close is it to what E.O. Leblanc dreamed of when he first established the National Day celebration in 1965? And what exactly was that dream? Look forward to the 1972 edition of D.S. Dominica, a literary publication that was published each National Day between 1968 and 1972. The dream, in Leblanc's own words, was that, quote, we should emerge into a brighter dawn of a new economic and political day. Suffice it to state, however, that one essential prerequisite to the attainment of that aforementioned ideal was the development among our people of love of their country and the understanding and appreciation of their roots, background, and culture. Our National Day celebrations have been designed for that very purpose. Unquote. The question we must ask ourselves is whether or not the population has ever caught and held on to the Leblanc vision, and if they did they take it seriously enough to create a way of life, a culture that reflected all the high ideals that he continually exhorted them to strive for. Where is the love of country that he explained was the one essential prerequisite for the attainment of national prosperity? Today, Dominica and Guyana are the only Caribbean countries with diminishing populations. The main ambition of the vast majority of young Dominicans is to get to the United States or almost anywhere else. And the main ambition of most of their parents is to see them succeed. The moral and values among youth and adults are at an all-time low. Lack of concern and respect for the environment is appalling, and from this country it promotes itself as the nature island of the world. I have never seen more derelict vehicles parked on roadsides, in the city, in towns, and throughout the countryside as in my own country. Some are even placed in major scenic viewpoints that visitors frequent. What is our policy on derelict vehicles? Why is it so difficult to get rid of them? The same applies to the dumping of garbage, the sweeping of gutters in the city and towns, the pollution of our rivers, including the mouth and the banks of the Rosa River, immediately next to the island's most used and premier market. Is respect for the environment taught in schools? Do people make a connection between cleanliness and tourism? Could the diminishing number of cruise ship calls be somehow connected? A recent visitor wrote to me a very delicately and carefully written proposal for a humane way of dealing with vagrants in Roseau who harass locals and visitors alike. Locals, he reminded me, had little choice. Visitors, he said, had thousands. If we are serious about ecotourism as a mainstay of the economy, we have to get serious about the built environment and as well the natural environment. Leblanc's vision also called for a certain creativity of thought and a stimulation of the creative imagination, especially through reading. He was featured in a book entitled Men of the Global South, which Ewart mentioned in his introduction, which celebrates the most imaginative black leaders of the world in the 20th century. The long article on him included how he, and I think that's the right word, conned the British into building a major road in Dominica, the East Coast Road. Today, our lack of vision has us building airports that are often too small, roads into housing developments that are too narrow, and dead ends that have no turning points. Or as in the case of certain sections of Picard, houses for Ross University students with no plan at all. Roads that have no drains in many areas and no edging, so that with heavy rains the water easily eats into the asphalt. We set up major industrial works next to major tourism sites, rivers and pools. The simplest roundabouts are badly planted with no artistic merit and are not maintained, or if not, plants are stolen. Is this all part of the new culture? And what of the cultural industries? Are we really interested in promoting our culture overseas? Are there incentives for creating recording studios? Are we willing to create films and documentaries to help combat the continuous diet of crime, violence, and sex that dominate our television programming? And then we ask ourselves, why is there such an increase in crime? And why do these young people use such foul language? Where are our playing fields, our running tracks to train our future Olympians? Where are our permanent sites for the World Creole Music Festival, Carnival, and our arts programs? Where are our schools programs, scholarships for training teachers in the arts and sports coaches? And if money is scarce, why not skip certain events for certain years so that as to finance other neglected areas, or to do properly particular events that need the added income for, or added funding for maximum impact? For example, cut funding to the World Creole Music Festival or Carnival or Independence celebrations for 2 or 3 years in order to build a permanent site for these festivals. Let the private sector fund these events in the interim years. Seek funding from friendly countries that have seldom been asked to partner with us: Norway, Netherlands, Brazil, and several others. Make annual grants to culture and sports departments from the lottery earnings. Encourage newspapers to put more good news on the front page and the bad news in the inside pages. Ask the radio stations to take their talk shows off the internet so that we can discuss our domestic problems and issues privately instead of broadcasting them to the world and thereby discouraging overseas Dominicans from returning home and investing in the island. Bring back love of country. Many areas need attention, there is no doubt. Much in Dominica needs correcting, both in governance and in the private sector. But should we kill the patient while applying the cure? The hard part about all this is that all of the above issues just mentioned and more are addressed in a highly comprehensive cultural policy that was adopted by government in 2007. Implementation, however, has been practically non-existent. Having said that, however, I have nothing but praise for the Department of Culture, who, with a minuscule budget and a skeleton of a staff, have been able to keep the Leblanc vision alive for all these years with a wide range of activities, not least of which is the recent opening of the Dominica Institute of Fine Arts. My hats off to Raymond Lawrence and his team. And so the Gilded Mango remains just what it is. Gilded, but for the most part, unable to be eaten to nourish, strengthen, and develop the nation. In the spirit of the Leblanc vision, I'm hereby inviting all sectors of society to reopen the conversation on Creole cultural nationalism. The world of the 1960s was very different, a very different place from the one that we currently inhabit. And change is so rapid that one often has hardly the time to assimilate a new standard or a thought pattern before another is already there to take its place. The very structure of society has shifted, and many of the petit bourgs of yesterday are the gros bourgs of today. And this is as it should be. In fact, it fulfills Leblanc's dream of equality for all, the right to education, equal opportunity, access to health care, housing, and communication. But there's also the downside of access to information and telecommunication, particularly television, I come back to it, and the internet, which expose our youth to the best, but also to the worst of everything. And we as parents can try to guide them to the right choices, but we all know that we have no guarantee that the right choices will be made. Edward Oliver Leblanc was an intellectual, a visionary, and a man of culture. Despite the many difficult decisions he had to make, he always put the country first by putting the people first, and so doing, putting the culture of the country first. This simple fact is significant enough to earn him the honored title of Father of the Nation. Thank you.